Welcome viewers, I am Professor Payal Nagpal and today we will be discussing theatre of the oppressed communities in society with special reference to the playwright Datta Bhagat. Before we actually start a discussion or get an overview of the work of Datta Bhagat, it is important to understand when we use the term oppressed, what exactly do we mean by it? So we will try to understand the movement by the people oppressed on the basis of caste, their identity, the nomenclature associated with them, and the beginnings of the anti-caste movement in India. To understand the resistance to caste division, it's first and foremost important to understand what division on the basis of caste is all about. So, if we look at a certain kind of classification that is there in Indian society, there are different kinds of classifications. We have classifications on the basis of class, there are differences on the basis of gender. But when we discuss caste, we go back to the system of the varnas or the categories, and this is broadly the Chaturvarna, that is the Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas and Shudras. So, where people were expected to be a part of a certain Varna on the basis of the work that they performed, these were also looked at in a hierarchical manner, where the Brahmins were considered to be at the top along with the Kshatriyas and followed by the other communities. Where the position of the Shudras was very different and oppressed, being the last in the social ladder, there was a mass of people at rock bottom. Technically, one can say that they were not even considered to be part of this Varna system and were situated outside it. It is important, viewers, to think about the position of these people and the fact that when we talk about identity, we talk about citizenship, what really is their position? What is their identity? Here, we must keep another aspect in mind. The caste system had an interlocking pattern with what one can call the feudal system that operated in society. And in fact, writers have often said that the appropriate term to understand this phenomena would be a kind of caste feudalism. What do we mean by this? So, one classification is on the basis of the work performed through the Varna system, and people are placed in a certain hierarchy or, as mentioned, practically outside it, the Avarnas, right? And there is a classification that is also related to land. So, there are people who own the land in a feudal system. Everything is associated with land. So, people who own the land, and there are people who till the land. Here too, one can say that there are a group of people that are actually outside of this transaction. What we mean is, apart from the owners of the land and the people who till the land, there is a group of people that are probably tied to the owners of the land for all kinds of odd jobs that they perform for these people. To quote Patankar and Gail Ombet, two hierarchies developed in the traditional feudal system. One was a hierarchy of groups defined in terms of their position in relation to the land, ranging from landlords to nominally independent peasants to tenant cultivators in varying savages of semi-serfdom to field servants in varying positions of semi-slavery. The other was a hierarchy of artisans and service workers, ranging from certain priests at the top down the scale through goldsmiths, barbers, down to weavers, washermen, leather workers, and others at the bottom, and related to the controllers of the land either through the Jajmani or the Balutedari system, which defined their duties. Which means we are already looking at a kind of interlocking of caste with the feudal system, an idea that one has just explained earlier. So apart from this, there is a category of people supposedly at the bottom. These are people who performed unskilled tasks and were therefore not bound to the land per se, but to the owners of the land whose tasks they performed. So for instance, delivering messages from one village to the other, cleaning up the village, removing dead cattle, all these tasks had to be performed. These people were then defined in terms of their exclusionary status. What do we mean by this exclusionary status? They are excluded both from the caste system and from the economics of the land. So they are in a sense not tied to the land. So whether it comes to work that is performed on the land or money that is received in terms of, or as per the barter system, anything that is received in terms of work performed, they are excluded from that as well. So their identity is constituted by a lack of relationship with either of these two important coordinates. As a result, their identity construction did not fall within the purview of these two systems. This mass of people, as mentioned by Patankar and Omvit, how through either the Jajmani system or the Balutedari system, this mass of people was paid a balut for their duties, and this was determined by the feudal lords. So they are tied actually to the feudal lords, that is to the human beings, and their chores were related to cleaning over time, and as a result of this, a biased social system, a system that is based on classification on the basis of caste and the feudal politics of land, considered these people to be impure or untouchable, and absolutely unfairly so. As Babu Rao Bagul points out, Varna and caste came to be determined on the basis of birth. This is because the ruling class wanted to ensure for itself the exclusive possession of wealth, power, and higher social status. So, to be born into a particular Varna meant something that was unchangeable, which meant that generations that follow would have to adhere to the code that was laid down as per that Varna, and they would also have to face a kind of hierarchy that had been established in this society. So the Varna system became a strategic way of securing land and assets from one generation to the other by ostracizing the people who did not have any land. From the coinage of the term untouchable to the term Harijan, in terms of nomenclature, we have to root this in the struggle for independence. According to Eleanor Elliot, 1935 onwards, there were two choices for the community relegated unfairly as the untouchables. This was either the Harijan or the scheduled caste. Harijan, as we know, was a term used by Mahatma Gandhi, and it meant people of God. But this continued to place the group in the context of the Chaturvarna system. People discussed rehabilitation measures, but were reluctant to look at this mass of people as an active group with agency in their own right. Zelliot very aptly explains that the rights of the untouchables, the development of untouchable leadership, and their participation in politics were not part of the Harijan concept, which is why, much as it might have given momentary relief and a certain sense of dignity, it did not give agency to the group that we refer to as untouchables in the context of the Varna system. Around in the post-independence world, around this time, there is a struggle for a new kind of definition of people and their identity. The community of people that we are calling as oppressed or broken decided to call themselves as Dalits. The term Harijan is rejected, and Zelliot in Ambedkar's world defines the word Dalit as meaning oppressed or broken. According to Zelliot, its use began, and I quote, its use began in the 1970s from among Ambedkar's followers. Thinker and scholar Rajkumar gives a detailed history of this term. As a Marathi word, he says, I quote from his book, it is found in Molesworth's Marathi English Dictionary of 1975, a reprint of the 1813 edition. It gives the meaning as ground, broken, or reduced to pieces generally. It derives from a Sanskrit word meaning crushed and is understood in all the Indian languages that are derived from Sanskrit. So, this is a term that is used to define the group of people that we have understood to be at the bottom of the Varna system, the Shudras and also the Atishudras, and the vast mass of people who are outside of this entire system. In another book titled Dalit Literature and Criticism, Kumar says, broadly speaking, the word Dalit is a term that symbolizes the new identity of a group of people who were earlier known as untouchables. Untouchability is a deeply ingrained consequence of the caste system and is an unacceptable and harmful social practice, quote unquote. In this way, we understand the nomenclature from the untouchables to the idea of the Harijan and to the constitution of the term and identity Dalit. This term appears pretty much in the 19th century, but it is in the 1970s that this term gains currency and gains agency. This is important for us to also understand the playwright in the course, that is Datta Bhagat, whose play Roots and Escape Routes will be under discussion. To understand why this term gains a lot of currency in the 1970s, we must understand how in a post-Ambedkar world, there is a kind of lack that is there, which is filled by the Dalit Panther movement that, they take it on from the American, the Black Panther movement, and it refers to a movement by people who are on the margins. Gail Ovmet, in the preface to a book called Poison Bread, relates this term to writing and agency, which means that we are now integrating three aspects. One, constituting identity. Two, the process of writing. And three, is the emergence of active agency and assertion in society. This is an important case in point, and we locate it at this particular intersection. Having discussed nomenclature, it is important to also understand the contributions made by some very important thinkers in this regard. We begin with the 19th century and the contribution made by Jyotiba Phule from Maharashtra. Born somewhere around 1827-28, Phule lived till about 1890. He was deeply influenced by the revolution of 1848 in France. He was also influenced by Thomas Paine's Rights of Man. He and his wife, Savitribai Phule, made an immense contribution to society by opening a school for girls from what was considered to be the lowest orders, that is the Shudras and Atishudras. And in 1848, they opened another one for girls of all social groups in 1851. Both Jyotiba Phule and Savitribai Phule taught in the school. They also started an evening school for working people in 1855. Phule is credited with starting what is called the Satyashodhak Samaj in 1871. In a lot of ways, G.P. Deshpande has stated that Phule anticipates Gandhi later in the 20th century. Phule had written a lot of books, and one is a play called Tritya Ratna. Pavada is Gulamgiri, Cultivators, Whipcord, Satsar, The Book of the True Faith. These are other prose works. Maya Pandit, who has also translated Phule's works, rightly points out how Phule's works, especially works like Gulamgiri, it poses the problem of slavery in historicist terms, where slavery is not related only to color, but in this case it has a different meaning. And Pandit rightly points out, for Phule, all recorded mythology is the history of Varna struggle. So, Phule proposes that there is nothing like the four Varna system, but there are two categories that are operational. One is the people who are powerful, and the other is the people who are completely disempowered. So he says that the people who are powerful are the Brahmins, and the rest he considers them to be the disempowered. Phule raises questions regarding the equality of all human beings and the hegemony of the code that is exercised by the powerful social groups, the powerful caste and class in this case. Phule states how they devised a weird system of mythology, the ordination of caste and cruel and inhuman laws, where the people who are accorded with the highest status in society, they are given the highest rights, privileges and gifts. And according to this yardstick, it is the people who are at the bottom of this Varna system that they are seen as pollution. So if we look at the movements by 19th century thinkers, Phule's name is Jyotiba Rao Phule's name is extremely important. Here too, if we were to look at a short excerpt from a section called Caste Differentiation from Phule's book, The Book of the True Faith, here a question is posed. Is caste differentiation natural to human beings? And Phule's response to this is, and I am quoting, originally human beings were not divided into castes. So, the question then posed by Ashwant is, how does one know that originally there was no caste differentiation among human beings? And to this, Phule's response is, animals, birds, etc. all differ from each other anatomically. Likewise, two-legged human beings are different from four-legged animals. And so, if there was something like caste, then it would have been operational for animals as well, is what he explains. But since this is not the case, Phule rejects this idea and he says that there is nothing like this, it is something that human beings have created on their own and created a kind of power structure in society. Deshpande points out, and I am quoting Deshpande here, Phule was not writing history. He was rejecting history from a Brahminical history, from a Shudra Atishudra perspective. If we keep this in mind, he says, we can make sense of his polemic and see its historical necessity and inevitability. What we are in essence saying here is that Jyotiba Phule was not writing history per se, but his position is of a rejection of the perspective from which history is written, which is that of the powerful varnas in society. But we can go a step further and go outside of Deshpande to actually say that Phule was writing a counter discourse to the way in which history has been understood so far. And I would say that in presenting things from a Shudra Atishudra point of view, he is rewriting and presenting a counter discourse to the accepted one. This is important for us to understand that history, when it is written down, is also from a specific perspective. Do we have an alternative to that perspective? This is a question that one must think about. What do we mean by alternative histories? So, how viable is Phule's argument is not the question here. It is to be agreed with Deshpande about his rejection of the mainstream view, and at the same time of recognizing Phule's attempt in creating this polemic and this rewriting. We have discussed things primarily from the context of Marathi writing, and we have Jyotiba Phule in this regard. Other thinkers and writers from Maharashtra, for example, later we have Gopal Baba Valankar. If we shift towards Tamil Nadu, then in the 19th century we have Yoti Dasar. But since we are going to be discussing a playwright from Maharashtra, it is important to understand the movement by the oppressed people in this context. If in this case we are to sum up what we have discussed so far, we must first and foremost pay attention to the way in which nomenclature of the oppressed communities changes. The change is historical, and any term that we used, we must map it against the time period in which the term originated. The preferred term of understanding the oppressed as broken was meant to empower the oppressed community. The movement that starts 1970s onwards is a movement that wants to seize the dignity of the people on the margins. At the same time, we must understand how nomenclature also presents to us a history of their marginalization. The history of the marginalization of people who are oppressed. Another related aspect that we need to understand here in terms of this change in nomenclature is protest and the need for change. Keeping this in mind, we understand that the polarity of purity and pollution that is propagated by the caste system needs to be done away with. Therefore, it is not only about identifying in terms of a name, but it also involves a complete rejection of hierarchies, of biases and prejudices that are generated by caste. In terms of literary writing, writings by people from the oppressed social group is therefore a marker of their realization of their identity as a collective. Viewers, any engagement with writings by the oppressed community is an attempt at first and foremost understanding the nature and history of oppression, and at the same time it is an attempt at understanding the need, the process and the history of articulation of writing, of their voices, of their resistance to this kind of marginalization. This collective identity is extremely important for us to engage with writings by people who are oppressed and marginalized on the basis of caste. I hope that this has presented to you a shift in understanding the community of people oppressed on caste basis, especially from the 19th century onwards to the 20th century. Thank you.